I was having an interesting conversation with someone the other day, and I mentioned that at this year's annual conference, I have been asked to, if I'm elected by the annual conference, to serve as chair of the Social Justice Committee for the whole state. And I said, well, sure, that sounds like fun. And I was told that the reason why they wanted me to serve in that capacity was because of Lafayette Park. And the way that Lafayette Park as a church has figured out how to do social justice. And I was talking to somebody who hears a lot of my sermons, and they said, I almost identified gender there, sorry. They said, I've never heard you preach a social justice sermon. And I went, I thought I preach them all the time. Don't I ask you to live differently in that? But it was like, okay, so it's time. Today is a social justice sermon, all right? So on the record, I am preaching it. Although, as I've been prepared for it, I realized social justice is not what the name of the committee should be. The name of the committee should be social holiness. Now that's something we don't think about and we don't talk a lot about being Methodist. But the truth is, social holiness is what fired up the early original Methodist movement. The purpose that John Wesley said was that we are to spread scriptural holiness to the world. We use a similar language right now. We say our vision is to make disciples for Christ. But scriptural holiness is different than disciples for Christ. It means it's everywhere. It's oozing out. But scriptural holiness is reigning. And we look at verses like, if you love God, you love your neighbor. And you look at the reality that if Jesus laid down his life as an example of love, that means I might have to get my hands dirty because I have to live out that love. So that's the name of our serving, Living Out Our Love. Doesn't it sound nice and romantic? It should be Valentine's Day. Because the truth is, living out our love is not roses and flowers and chocolate. Living out our love is doing the work in relationship with one another. When one of us are difficult to be around, we find a way to live with one another. Wesley understood that only holiness, get this, he said, now it is through God's grace, it is through the act of Jesus Christ that we are saved, that we are cleansed and redeemed from our sins. It is holiness that renders us fit for heaven. Isn't that interesting? Now, what is holiness? Well, holiness is a whole new world that we don't think about. Because we've kind of been conditioned in our Western theology and mentality of individual, it's me and Jesus, right? Once I get that in line, we're all good. Me and Jesus, we're buds, it's good. But social holiness is realizing that God is holy and that we are to be holy as well. And here's where it gets to be a little bit challenging. Wesley looks at the Hebrew words for holy and God, and it's kadosh. Kadosh. Isn't that beautiful? It almost sounds holy. Kadosh. And they would say that Adonai kadosh, God is holy. God is different than all of creation. God made creation, and God is different. Holy is different from all the rest. And we're to be holy. Now the Greek word for that is hagio. And when you have a plural of hagio, you're hagai. So the truth is, this whole of us are supposed to be Haggai's. No S, sorry. Haggai, because Haggai is plural. You just learned Greek. So next time somebody asks you who you are, you just say, I'm Haggai. And that'll go, what? Just imagine what the conversation would be. But what it means is, you're different. You're different than everybody else. There's something about you in the way you live your life that is different than your neighbor who doesn't believe in God. There's something different in about how you conduct your business than your coworkers. You are Haggai. You are different. And we live in a world where different isn't welcome, isn't it? If you're not exactly the average body size, which I just found out this week, I fit. Oh, no. We still have miles to go. If you're not normal, you're out. If you don't fit the, male, female, 2.1 child household, 2-car garage with 2 cars and, prosperous employment titles, you're out. That's what world we live in. For the norm is to, keep up with the Joneses, and he who wins at the end has the most toys. But we don't take them with us. And often we don't have a relationship with our family to give them away because we've been so focused on collecting the toys. That's the norm. And we're called to be different. We're called to be holy. Wesley says, and I have to tell you that I'm just starting to live with this statement. This is a Wesley quote. If Jesus Christ does not or cannot make the profoundest difference to us and within us, then the entire Christian enterprise is pointless. John Wesley said that. Can you imagine? He said that if our relationship with Jesus Christ is not the most profoundest thing that happens to us, if it is not the most profoundest thing that drives us in our decision making, in our actions, then we shouldn't even be calling ourselves Christian. Why bother? And I have to tell you that I was feeling major conviction on that. Because I don't know if I always live it out. And if I don't always live it out, how can I model that for you? So being holy is being different. It is knowing that my relationship with God makes me different, and I choose to live in that difference with comfort and freedom and power. Part of spiritual or social holiness is that we're to be part of the renewal and the mending of creation. We understand that God created the world, and so we are caretakers of the world. And that's part of who we are because we're different. I'm thinking about getting a t-shirt. I am different. It's good. Just like it's good to be green. Kermit and I agree. But it's about not only mending the earth from an ecological perspective, it is not only doing acts of mercy, it is creating changes in systems. I learned a lot this week. I knew when we began that the Methodists have a history of being anti-alcohol, being don't drink. And I always assumed that the reason it was is because the people who were impoverished were alcoholics that the church reached out to. And so they saw the devastations of alcohol in someone's family, which is an extremely important issue that the church doesn't talk about a whole lot, does it? Doesn't talk about the damage that happens with alcoholism. We just want to fit in. The original motivation between Wesley and not wanting alcohol was that in Britain at that time, half of the wheat production went to alcohol, which meant that all the wheat was going to make alcohol, all right? And that means you got to have wheat to make, bridge bread people? Bread. So if you were poor, bread, the staff of life, was expensive. And so he led the Methodists to stand against the government to not subsidize all the liquor companies. Because not only does alcoholism impact people's lives, but it made people not able to eat. Can you imagine? Those of you who have a smartphone, I have an exercise for you. Look up and see how many pounds of corn it takes to make 1 pound of beef. I used to know that. Think about what we do if we just skip beef 1 meal a week. The impact we do on our brothers and sisters who die of hunger. Yeah, it still exists. 1,000 people every minute die. Hunger. But what could we do different? The way he lived it out was he not only was sensitive about alcohol and it taking up all the wheat, he realized that all the gentlemen farmers were raising horses instead of cattle. Now, why would you raise horses? Because cows provide meat, right? Well, guess what mode of transportation was really popular during those days? Fine horses. And they were really popular in France. And so what they would do is all the people who had means to raise livestock would raise horses because they could sell them at a greater profit than they would do cows to France, which meant that beef was hard for people to buy. And pork and eggs were also expensive because little farmers were being eaten up by large farming families. That doesn't sound familiar at all, does it? Wesley called us to social holiness, which means that we don't live complacently in our lives, that we look at our actions and see the ramifications of what we do. I admit I have lots of sitting before God to figure out how I fully respond to being socially holy. And I invite you to do that too. There are many things in our world we need to do something about. Last week I took a training lesson on mental health survival. I found out that 40%, according to statistics, people who are homeless, who are displaced, have mental health issues. 40% of the people we serve at the bridge, by statistics, have mental health issues. And there's a lack of services available. I found out something even more horrific, though. Guess where the largest institution is for housing people with mental health is?